We're really happy to have our next speaker, who is Dr. Campbell, and she is going to be presenting on urban agriculture in Florida, current barriers and future opportunities. So thank you, Catherine. If the clicker doesn't work on the first slide, you may have to mouse it.
Okay. Am I already sharing?
You are. Everything's good to go. You're up there.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for being here for my talk. This is the first in-person talk I've done since 2019. So I hope I remember how to do this. So I'm going to be talking with you about 3 different studies that I've done over the past 2 years on urban agriculture. I'm going to start by giving you some background on urban agriculture. I'm going to give you a rough typology of urban agriculture operations. I'm going to present some results of extension interviews we did, and then the results of interviews we did with urban farmers, as well as a survey of urban ag operations in Florida.
The camera wasn't on, so we're going to get the camera on now.
Okay, so there you go. All right. Okay, so as we all know, Florida is rapidly urbanizing. That's why we're all here. We've added 3 million new residents in the last decade alone. 44 out of 67 counties are classified as urban by USDA. And as you can see from this map from the Census Bureau, virtually the entire state is now considered a metro or micropolitan urban area. So urban agriculture is an important opportunity for us here in Florida because we have a number of food access and diet related risk factors. More than 4 out of 5 Florida residents don't eat the recommended servings of fresh fruits and vegetables. More than two-thirds of Florida residents are overweight or obese. We've got issues as well with food insecurity, with roughly 1 in 5 children in Florida living in a household that is food insecure. Okay, so what is urban agriculture? Unfortunately, there actually isn't a standard definition of urban agriculture. So definitions differ depending on region, area of study. Just as a general definition, it's food production or animal husbandry in an urban or peri-urban area. So that includes commercial, non-commercial, and hybrid type operations. And there are a number of different activities, types of operations, and goals. So some common urban agriculture activities that you all may be familiar with are various types of gardens, home, institutional, and school, urban and peri-urban farms, farming on vacant lots. And I want to note this last bullet, which is urban sales and market channels. In many definitions of urban agriculture, the urban sales and distribution are included as part of urban agriculture, even though the food isn't actually being produced in the urban area. So now I'm turning to a rough typology. We have done a cluster analysis based on the results of our interviews, and this is just a sort of informal way I'd like to present to you to categorize in your mind different types of operations. So there are a group that we're calling the innovators. These are very high tech. They are selling high-end, often to restaurants and high-end resorts. And also, for example, Villages Grown. Some of us have been there. IFAS has done some site visits with them. They sell through their own store, and they also sell to the University of Florida's Gator Dining program. So here's another example, which I call the civic agriculturalist. And these are farmers that are really interested in connecting farms and communities and helping people sort of get back to understanding where food comes from. They're interested in community health, supporting having a valued workforce. The third group I call the advocates. Many of these are operating in a sort of hybrid kind of operation where they have both for-profit and a nonprofit wing. This is an example from Orlando, where they do some sales, but they also do nonprofit work in contributing to food access and food security for people who live in areas with limited access to healthy food. This group I call urban-oriented agriculture. And so you recall before I mentioned that the urban sales and market channels are considered part of urban agriculture. And so This is a farm that isn't actually in an urban core, but their market is in an urban area, and the way their business is organized is doing direct sales to urban markets. And then the last group I call grassroots agriculture, and we didn't include them in the study that I'm presenting the results of today because we were really focused on commercial agriculture. But this is an important dimension to urban agriculture, which is the community gardens and people growing food for themselves to facilitate community connections and increase fruit and vegetable consumption among people who may not have it. Okay, so just to keep those in your mind, we've got different kinds of commercial urban agriculture farms. We've got hybrid kinds of operations, and then there are also sort of nonprofit kinds of urban agriculture. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of work on this for the last 2 years, and I'm going to be presenting the results of the interviews with extension faculty, the interviews with urban farmers, as well as survey results. So I'm going to start with the extension interview. I'm just going to do a high-level overview because my PhD student, Alicia Papanek, is going to be presenting tomorrow, and she'll have a poster with more detail on this. So we conducted interviews of 17 extension faculty who do extension programs in urban agriculture. We got our sample by referral from district extension directors. We had good representation from across the state. They're primarily agents who work in commercial or residential horticulture, with representation also from agents that work in community resource development, as well as food systems. So we asked them what kinds of activities they knew of that were going on in their county, or what kinds of programs they offered. And you can see hydroponics on the left. Is that too small for you all to read? Okay, great. So hydroponics was the most prevalent, but they covered the range of activities that I had on the slide earlier, common urban agriculture activities. We asked them what barriers they had to offering extension programming for urban agriculture. And a number of these had to do with sort of the rural-urban interface, or the sort of conflict with rural and urban audiences, having to do with elected officials, outside organizations. And then, as with, I think, all of us, people had issues with adopting new program areas because everyone already was very busy with everything they were doing. They couldn't add a new program area without something else being taken off their plate. For their key opportunities that they saw for the future for IFAS extension, it would be developing programs that are really targeted to the unique needs of urban ag producers, so technical assistance, and they really see this as an opportunity for IFAS extension to reach out to new audiences that we haven't traditionally served. So in summary, they think urban agriculture is growing. They would like to do more programming, but they're limited by a lack of time and funding. But they think investing in programming as well as staff could help to provide audiences or access to new audiences for IFAS extension. Okay, turning now to the interview and survey results. So we used the interviews to help inform the survey we developed, but I'm going to present the results in the opposite order because it's easier for exposition. So just as a warning. So the urban farmer interviews, we got referrals from the extension agents that we talked to, and ended up with 30 urban farmers. And for the survey, it was distributed by Ben Boleski through the FNGLA newsletter. It was distributed by Florida SARE, as well as the Florida Black Farmers and Agriculturalists listservs. Beginning with farm characteristics, urban farms in Florida are generally very new. Almost half of them have only been in existence for 5 years or less than 5 years. They're operating on a very small scale. 40% of them are on an acre or less. So by comparison, the average size for a Florida farm is 246 acres. So they're very, very small. They were predominantly white and not Hispanic. These demographics track with rural farmers in Florida. And they're a highly educated group, with 70% of them having a bachelor's degree or higher. The overwhelming majority of our survey respondents had a decision-making role on the farm, being either an owner or a manager, an owner and a manager. 20% of them were under 40, which USDA classifies as a young farmer. And more than 50% of them are considered to be beginning farmers because they have 10 years of experience or less. 45% are women, which is a bit higher than the average, which is 36% of rural farmers are women. So a little bit higher representation for women. So for production methods, they're primarily doing soil-based production. And so I note that from the extension interviews, there was a heavier focus on hydroponics. But from what we heard from the surveys, people are primarily doing soil-based production. We asked what their top 3 market outlets were to get a sense for what their primary sources of income were, rather than a check all that apply. So they are primarily selling direct to consumer via farmers markets, CSAs, on-farm sales. And so they're taking advantage of their proximity to consumers by doing these direct sales. We asked them what their top 3 goals were, and the number 1 response, most prevalent response, was to increase food access and security. Second was environmental sustainability. And then surprisingly, because we limited this to commercial producers, making a profit was only the 3rd highest selected. Okay, so now to add some color from what we got in the interviews, in terms of what they said about food access, some of them had programs where their customers could buy an additional box of food that they worked with a community organization to distribute food to people that need it. Some of them talked about having environmental goals of trying to show people that doing farming and being environmentally responsible aren't internally inconsistent. A lot of them talked about wanting to build soil. They talked about wanting to create jobs, and they emphasized the fact that they wanted them to be good jobs and jobs that people could feel a sense of self-satisfaction in having. They talked about wanting to support community and making the farm a sort of focal point for people to come and learn about where their food comes from. So if you recall the typology earlier, the civic agriculturalists, we definitely saw a lot of that with these farmers who really want to help connect communities back to their food. Okay, so we asked them what their top 3 barriers were. Labor was the most prevalent response, and I think this may be influenced by the fact that this survey was done in July of 2021, where we were really getting into a labor crunch. The reason I say that is because it did not come in even in the top 5 in the interviews, which were done in 2020. So I wanted to highlight some of the barriers are sort of standard financial barriers in terms of management, access to capital that a number of small farms have. And then there are also issues that are sort of specific to urban farms, having to do with laws and regulations, land access, as well as the kind of conflicts that come up from farming next to residential areas. So in their words, again, from the interviews, one of the issues with labor had to do with the fact that they need someone who can both use a tractor as well as go to a farmer's market and interact with customers because they're such small operations. They also talked about the fact that for $20 an hour, people can get better jobs that are less physically demanding than actually working on a farm. For finances, they talked about how there are loans that are available to rural farms that are not available to urban farms. And so that was a struggle for them. And many of them talked about having to rely on their own savings to start their farms. Regulations and the rural-urban interface came up in every single interview, talking about governmental red tape. They had issues even with understanding what they were or weren't allowed to do. They took a ask forgiveness, not permission kind of approach that came up a lot. They talked about the issues of land development and how that was, getting land out of agricultural zoning and into residential, making land unaffordable to them, and making it so that they were having those conflicts with residential developments next to their farms. So the top 3 opportunities, again, we asked for their top 3. I wanted to highlight these because this value-added agritourism and training are things that they could do without needing to adopt new crops or get additional land. So these are things that they can do on their farms with everything else they're currently doing without adding anything else. So value adding, if you don't know, would be like if you're growing strawberries and you make them into jam. So you can sell them at a little bit of a higher price, or if you wouldn't have been able to sell them, you can preserve them so that you could sell them later. And so they think that seems like a good opportunity for them because they don't have to adopt a new crop. They can just make more money from what they're already growing. For agritourism, you can see one farmer put it bluntly, it seems like a no-brainer. They can just invite people out to the farm for a weekend, and that can be a good source of income for them. So conclusions, urban ag farms are not a monolith. There are many different types of operations with different purposes, and for us to be effective at supporting them with both research and extension, we need to think about the different types of farms and what their unique goals and needs are. They are primarily selling direct to consumer, taking advantage of their proximity to their consumers. They're looking for ways to increase revenue on their small plots of land. They have standard barriers that all small farms have, and then they have extra barriers that have to do with farming in an urban space, which have to do with land access, cost of land, and regulations. I would like to thank the UF-IFAS CDIP program and the deans for supporting this research project. And with that, I can take questions.
Can you please explain what they meant by agritourism?
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. The question was, what do they mean by agritourism? So agritourism is just when you're doing events on the farm. So you're tapping into that tourist market, which has seemed to be a good opportunity for Florida because we have so many tourists that come here. And so that could be anything from a, farm field day, corn maze, or, a U-pick kind of operation, or sometimes additionally workshops, a canning workshop or something like that.
I saw you had something up there about some of the farmers trying to close the loop on the farm, so to speak, how they manage their soil, etc. Did anyone talk about closing the supply chain loop, with making it a little closer to home, so where maybe it might have a bigger impact on providing affordable, accessible food that they're growing to a wider base?
Yeah, it was a little hard for me to hear you, but I'm going to try to repeat what I think you were saying, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. So the question was, did any of the farmers, in addition to talking about closing the loop, environmentally talk about closing the loop in terms of supply chain and making that food accessible within the communities? Many of them talked about that. I think it was something like 18 of the 30 interviews that came up. And they're really interested in providing good, healthy food to their communities. Again, I would say the sort of exception would be those innovators that are selling to the, hotels and restaurant industry. But even, I use the example of Villages Grown, they do want to distribute food even within the villages. And so that is a big part. One of the farmers even said, being an urban farmer doesn't entirely make sense. Like if I just wanted to make money, I wouldn't be an urban farmer. And so they're really motivated by these other kinds of concerns like supporting food access and, you know, the immediate community around them.
Yeah, so I was just wondering about the access to grants or financial support and such, and the reason I'm really curious, are they aware if there's anything available to them, what routes they go? And I asked that because I was at Full about 5 years ago, and with representatives that were there, I asked them about support for urban agriculture programs, and they couldn't identify one grant. They said just that we don't really have any grants or programs directed towards urban ag. So what is available for folks?
So she's asking the hard question, which is what grant funding is available to them. So a couple of things. Many of the farmers said, I think there are grants, or we've tried to do that before, but they all talked about being time poor. And they were like, you know, to be honest, I could submit a grant to get this new tractor that I need, but I really just don't have time. Like I need to be marketing and farming, and I don't have time to write grants. Another issue is that the 2018 Farm Bill specified the need for an urban ag census. I should have said this right at the top. Urban farms aren't included in the census of agriculture. So we don't really have a sense of their scope or where they are. And so this was a sort of incomplete initial look at what's happening here in Florida. But part of that 2018 Farm Bill was an urban agriculture and emerging enterprise initiative that they just finally established recently, and the first round of grants went out last summer, and those were only able to be applied for by nonprofits. And so I think, you know, the USDA is really trying to figure out how to handle funding to these farmers and how to support them, but I don't have a good answer to funding for them.
We have funded urban ag projects at the Water Management District through our ag culture funding. So if it relates to one of our missions, water conservation or water quality, so cisterns, things like that.
Yeah, that's great.
So St. John's is funding.
Yes. Yeah. For people on Zoom, the water management districts have funded. The one thing I'll note that I also should have said earlier, we asked them what kind of certifications they had or what kinds of programs they were enrolled in. And I think only 17% of them are enrolled in the BMP program. So that's an opportunity for extension.
What are some of the specific obstacles they face in like an urban setting? I know you mentioned like land use and permits and things like that. Do you have to have a permit to run an urban farm? Does it have to be approved by like the city or the county or the state? Like what's the big hurdle there?
Yeah, so the question was what kinds of sort of issues happen in the urban space in terms of regulations and approvals. I mean, one issue is that it's just not clear what is allowed or not. And so this is where there's sort of a push for municipalities or counties to get into their policy documents some statement on what's allowed, because officially many of these codes of ordinances are silent on urban agriculture. So it's neither allowed nor disallowed. And so, you know, agriculture, if you're operating in a parcel where agriculture isn't a primary use, in many cases, you're just left to guess what's allowed. And then, you know, you have issues of overlapping regulations in some cities and counties. So I think there's in general a lack of clarity, and some of the work that I've been doing is trying to help educate the people in local government what these operations are trying to do to give them some understanding of what should and shouldn't be allowed. Because the Florida Right to Farm Act all applies to any commercial agriculture. And so if an operation has been in existence for more than a year, it is operating consistent with best management practices, like lowercase BMPs, they cannot be sued, and they cannot be regulated. And so there's a reluctance on the part of local governments to let people start an urban farm with the fear that they wouldn't be allowed to then regulate it because of the Right to Farm Act.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.